Good morning.
Good morning today.
The operative principle in the result of spirituality, and the result of any understanding is implication. The implication of what it feels to you like a situation is the resultant context within which you will feel you exist, and where what you will feel you are, what you will feel is happening. Implication is subtle because it's indirect. You can't deal with implication directly. But what you can deal with directly is the information that is the basis of the implication. And it's this implication that's one of the troubles. It's the implication that motivates spiritual inquiry. It's the implication that creates a seeming unsatisfactoriness, or a seeming difficulty, or a seeming incompleteness, or a seeming lack of fulfillment that one hopes to remedy through some kind of spiritual or philosophical inquiry, discovery. And in fact, such a discovery can be effective. Such a discovery can achieve results whose implication is completely satisfactory. Because it happens that what is actually happening here is astounding in its implication by comparison with what consensus reality, frame of reference, generally creates as its implication, which is very unsatisfactory in many regards in terms of our ideas of our social situation, our ideas of our failing, our failing biosphere, our, all these various implications that are occurring and are relevant and are more or less crappy, or at least problematic, as well as our individual lifespans, our problematic social situations, our problematic health, our problematic aging and going to die soon, and then what? And all of these various other issues that are sort of hang over you as question marks, as oh my God, this, what's up with this? What's going on? In talking about spirituality, there's really no point in talking about what it is, what reality is, what the goal is, so to speak, what the finish line is, what the completeness is, because it cannot be talked about, and it's also already the case. And there's no need to understand it or talk about it. the relevant situation in spirituality is the problem, which essentially consists of misinformation. And it's not a matter of substituting correct information for misinformation. It's a matter of removing the misinformation, because as it happens, reality itself is its own information which cannot be communicated secondhand. It cannot be communicated through symbols or through words. So it need not be communicated because it is already completely revealed immediately and imminently in simple presence of your being. And the only thing that can blind you to the fact of this astounding revelation is absorption and being caught up in misinformation, which is, unfortunately, seems to be the typical human condition. Humans seem to be largely brainwashed by various consensus reality worldviews, which are inculcated by, the upbringing and by the structure of language and by reinforcement through being continually bombarded with social information that seems to be self-reinforcing of this worldview. So it's really it's essentially an issue of brainwashing. It's an issue of having been convinced that things are a certain way, and then one is stuck with the implication of that way that is being held to be true. If things were that way, then the implications are such and such, which implies various problems and difficulties and issues, and here we are. And this is more or less perhaps a typical human perspective, a typical human frame of reference of what seems to be happening, what feels one is, what one feels one's life is, what one feels one's environment is. Consensus reality is astoundingly and completely and utterly wrong. It's inaccurate. It's just not true. And one of the obstacles to clearly seeing what this is how divergent what this is from consensus reality. So in most cases, if someone tells someone else how it is, they won't believe it. They go, "You're kidding me, this is absurd. That's like, that's beyond Easter Bunny and Santa Claus all in one, I mean, it makes religious stories of miracles look commonplace compared to what is actually occurring." So one has to come to see for oneself. One has to discover directly through investigation of one's own, or whether through investigation or through stumbling upon through some kind of a process of direct revelation, what one actually is, what one's being actually is, which of course conveys it self-verifyingly reveals its own nature, and self-verifyingly, of course, conveys its own implication, which constitutes what has been called liberation, realization, enlightenment, all these wonderful, glorious sounding terms that have been put forth in various spiritual traditions, which simply is the implication of the actual condition, the implication of reality itself, not some reality in capital letters that's out there somewhere that you fight your way to, but this reality that is the sole reality, the only reality that ever has been. So the issue is not finding reality, the issue is letting go of dispelling misinformation, convincing and relatively seemingly relatively internally consistent misinformation that we've all been brainwashed. So it's rather analogous to being to deprogramming someone who's been in a cult or something, I imagine. You know, we're all, you know,
Culties.
yeah, we're all, you know, complicit and completely mindless members of the cult of consensus reality. And we don't know it. We think that's reality. We think that's how it is. And so it's a challenge to perceive, because if you already think that's the way it is, what do you do about it? Someone tells you it's not that way, you say, you're wrong, it's absurd, you're crazy. It's like this, and of course it's like this, because I know it's like this, and everyone I know knows it's like this, so it's like this. So you're nuts, because you're telling me it's not. But fortunately, it's not a matter of tit for tat. It's not a matter of hearsay. One can look directly at the nature of one's own experience, which clearly reveals its nature. It's not hidden, it's not concealed in any degree whatsoever. But typically we don't bother to. Typically we sort of take that for granted, skim over it, and go right to the interpretation, go right to our narrative or our story that's going on. And we're off and running, and then life sucks, and what are you going to do? So that's the nature of the problem. The nature of the solution, as I said, is actually fairly simple, but it's also challenging, not because it itself is difficult, but because of the profound and subtle and deeply rooted entrenchment in misunderstanding that we've all been conditioned into. And so this, and again, the radical difference between the actual nature and the brainwashed mindset, that they're so completely contrary that it's one, you know, the initial reaction is always like, no, it can't be like that. That's wrong. It couldn't be that. I'm fantasizing. So then you look for something else. And so one undermines one's own efforts simply through disbelief in, because as one does an investigation, there's a kind of a tendency to check up on how one's doing with reference to what one already knows. And this is contrary to this very process, to the very nature of this, because what one's investigating, one is so utterly contrary to what one already knows that any kind of a trying to check out the course of the investigation with reference to what one already knows is going to queer the deal. It's going to raise all sorts of complications and confusions that are unnecessary, because there is utter confusion and complication with regard to comparison between the actual nature and consensus reality worldview, because they're completely divergent, they're completely contrary. In fact, in many ways, it's kind of amusing to look at sort of in the abstract. In many ways, consensus reality worldview is just about 180 degrees contrary from the actual condition, which is interesting to me. It's very peculiar that it happens to be that way. Pretty much point for point. For example, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but it's kind of fun. For example, in consensus reality worldview, you're a small person, you're not even a small person, you're worse than that. You're a tiny little ephemeral spark of consciousness. It's a byproduct of some chemical electrical reactions in your central nervous system that is an outgrowth of your body which is this tiny, small, vulnerable biological system running around this vast environment, which is basically out to eat it or kill it or crush it. So what you are as a perspective is virtually nothing, dependent upon all of these subsystems and subsystems and subsystems, which are progressively, which are small and small and small when they're near you, and vulnerable when they're near you, and get vast and threatening when they go out. So there's a small little person in this vast world that is not you, that is more or less antagonistic to you, or at least potentially problematic. And the actuality is completely the opposite. As a matter of fact, you are vast. You are everything, and the world is a small thing that appears in you. It's pretty much opposite. Pretty much opposite. And to say it like that to someone who thinks consensus reality, it's like, oh, that's nuts. What do you mean the world is in me? I'm bigger than the world. This is all my, this is all my experience. I guess in practice, the interesting question is, so what do you do about that? How can one go about investigating, discovering the true information, discovering the nature of what is actually here and how it actually is that way? Which discovery will, by its very nature, invalidate one's wrong worldview and reveal one's correct situation, which, as it happens, will address and solve all the problems that are raised by the erroneous implications of your inaccurate worldview that you've been brainwashed in. So how does one do that? Well, it's really quite simple. Look at your actual experience. Look at what your experience is, what it is mechanically, what it is existentially, what is happening right here, right now, and the way in which it's happening. And the texture of it, its presence, its spontaneity, the fact that the present moment, all conditions in the present moment appear completely spontaneously in the instant without any manipulation or process or structure. Just, right now, everything is present exactly as it is. It doesn't need to second guess itself or ramp itself up or work itself up to doing that. Just instantaneous flash of here-ness, everything completely. Things that you're used to qualifying as objective, here. Things that you're used to qualifying as subjective. Whatever light you happen to be seeing in this instant is present with exactly the same spontaneity as whatever thought you happen to think at the moment, whatever emotion you happen to be feeling at the moment, whatever sense of touch you happen to be feeling at the moment. Everything appears instantaneously, completely in the moment without any process and with absolute intimacy. And you can also notice that there's a literally infinite, you could say, bandwidth of different textures present. There's what we think of as light present with different degrees of color, different degrees of brightness. There's sound present with different degrees of frequency, different degrees of volume, and so on and so forth. There's touch present with all of its various ranges of difference. There's thought present with all of its infinite ranges of difference. Emotion present, And then if you look, you'll notice that there's also a virtually limitless, unacknowledged range of other experience present, extrasensory type experience, vibes and nuances, things that we don't have language for or words for in human language because it's not part of the human game structure. You can't talk about it, so it doesn't exist in terms of what you can talk about. It's too ephemeral, it's too insubstantial, it's too instantaneous. people that do a lot of meditation become very aware of this, because there's, all of this clearly experiential event and qualities present that one cannot describe. It's not thought in a simple sense of, oh, I'm thinking about such and such. It's not, it's extrasensory information. It's information that's not experiential actuality, that is not qualifiable within one of the sense groups or within mind, as we ordinarily put it. And this takes up actually the lion's share of experience if one's taking an inventory. We become, very aware of this quality, these qualities of experience. For example, when we're falling asleep, the awareness of the external environment fades, and sensory awareness fades, but your experience doesn't diminish. It's not like it becomes less. On the contrary, it just sort of opens into more and more of this sort of more ephemeral, less form-oriented flavors, qualities. Again, language failed. But the experience is completely accessible and in fact completely obvious once one tunes into it, notices that it's actually there. And so all of these ranges of experience are always present now, in the instant. Whether you're awake, whether you're asleep, whatever state you qualify yourself as being in, the continuum of your experiential field and all of its information is always full on. Nothing gets less, nothing gets more. If you close your eyes, there's no less light present in the field of vision. It just has a different character all of a sudden. It changes from all this color and apparent, sharp differentiated patterns to apparent little flickerings and patterns and speckles and, literally countless, infinite, little tiny flickers that form various patterns. But, we're all very familiar with this. You close your eyes and hang out with it for a few minutes and you'll see what you see. It's completely obvious. But there's not any less information present when you close your eyes than when you open them. It just changes. If you're asleep, there's not any less information present. All the bandwidths of experience are full. It's just the emphasis changes in terms of what seems to be up front and center, so to speak. You go into a dream and there's no more or less information present. Again, the emphasis just changes and shifts around and juggles itself very fluidly, very spontaneously. So just looking at the presence of experience, one can discover very quickly this nature, this fact of this full field that is literally infinitely differentiated with information. Another interesting quality of the field of experience is that it's literally infinitely differentiated. If you take any point within the field, thinking of it spatially, what the information that's present in that point is unique and different from any other information presented anywhere else in the field. In other words, for example, in your visual field, anything you see at one point, you see that only there, and everywhere else within the visual field is different. Not only that, but that point is different in the next instant, because the all is continuously morphing and changing. Perhaps subtly, perhaps not so subtle, depending. Like if you're looking out the window of a bullet train, things are changing very, very rapidly and very obviously. If you're sitting alone quietly, not moving in a still room, if I think of it, there's nothing that's changing. But in fact, if you look at your experience, it's continually changing and fluctuating and breathing and pulsing. Perhaps in relatively gentle, subtle ways in all this. But this intrinsic dynamism is discoverable because it's always true across the board. So your entire experience is infinitely differentiated within itself. It's infinitely differentiated in the instant. In other words, what appears in the instant appears only then. It's never appeared before. It's never going to appear again. For example, what you're seeing right now, you've never seen before. Exactly. And you're never going to see it again. It's already gone. It's bang. It just may as well never have happened as far as any residue goes. And this is true across the board. You know, you can classify subfields of experience, like your visual field of experience, or your auditory, you know, field of hearing, field of thought, and you'll discover these same phenomena within all of these fields, absolutely consistently. Another thing you discover if you look is that this division of the total experiential field into these subcategories is basically arbitrary. There's no boundary between vision and hearing and thought and touch. They're intuitively and immediately obvious to differentiate, but in actual fact, you cannot. They're all essentially the same thing, working in essentially the same way. They're all the presence of these instantaneous sparkles of texture. And they become classified according to the nature of that texture. So light has a particular texture that you can obviously and immediately differentiate, oh, this is light, so I must be seeing. And sound has a different texture. So sound, you can tell sound from light because of the difference of the light texture versus the sound texture. Or you can think of it as frequency, or I mean, who knows what. But if you look closely at the way light works, the way sound works, in terms of what it feels like in the instant, you'll discover you're looking at the same thing, just sort of with a slight different emphasis, a slight different frequency, a difference of texture. But the dynamism is exactly the same, the apparition is exactly the same, the differentiation is exactly the same. And ultimately, it becomes pretty arbitrary to distinguish them, except for this spectrum of range of textual difference that is found all along the experiential field. Or you go to the field of thought, for example, which is obviously more tenuous and more subtle or delicate than the textures of any of the sense fields. But again, if you look closely, you find exactly the same thing. It basically presents in a similar way as infinitely differentiated within itself, instantaneous, non-repeating, so on and so forth. So again, it's just a range of textures. So it's kind of like a spectrum, you know. You can look at a rainbow and you see all the colors laid out. And you can clearly see, oh, that's green and that's red and red's not green, green's not red. But they're all light. It's basically a continuum of the same thing that is presenting with this different way, and you know, with this different apparent bandwidths. And likewise, if you look at experience, if you look at the textures, the way the dynamism, the intimate immediacy of the way experience happens, you can notice that the different sense fields are very similar. It's all essentially the same thing appearing with, you know, apparent textual differentiations. They're differentiable according to these textures, but it's all a continuum, the same thing appearing in the same way. You know, and this is not something to hold philosophically or to aspire to or something, but simply look and see for yourself and explore it, check it out. Check out the nature of your experience and see the way this is so. As one sits in this explanation, in this exploration, and plays with it, you discover some other interesting things. You discover that not only is differentiation between the sense fields arbitrary and basically imaginary, but differentiation in terms of other parameters is also arbitrary and essentially imaginary. For example, subjective and objective cannot actually be found. You know, thought appears exactly the same way as vision or touch of something supposedly objective appears, and the discriminating one is being subjective and one is being objective. If you look at it, you'll discover there's no basis in the actual experiencing for this differentiation. So the differentiation is imposed basically in the nature. Also, one discovers some other, other classifications that turn out to be very arbitrary. For example, let's say spontaneity versus intentionality. So I can say, well, I can move my hand, and I'm, it feels like I'm doing that. I'm intending to move my hand, But if I look very, very closely at the actuality of that apparition, it spontaneously appears in exactly the same way as, say, the shape of that chair spontaneously appears. And I think of myself as I'm not doing that chair, but I am moving my hand. But if I look very intimately at the actual instant of experiencing the moving of the hand, the presence of the experience of the chair, the presence of the experience of so-called intentionality or thought about it or whatever, all of that just appears in experience. For there to be any kind of actual intentionality, I would have to have the intention to have the intention. If having an intention just appears, then I'm not actually doing it. It feels like intentionality, but if it just appears, then whatever's doing the appearing is what did it, not me. And then again, of course, it gets more subtle. You go down the rabbit hole. I go looking for some supposed me that is doing it or not doing it, and nothing like that can be found. Because in this actual immediacy of experiential presence, where's me? It's not, it's not that it's not me. If anything, maybe it's all me. But qualifying it in terms of meanness or not meanness just seems arbitrary and absurd. It's just it. It is, it's actual. And, if it's me, okay, I'm actual. If it's light, okay, light's actual. If it's this chair, okay, this chair is actual. But all of these sub-classifications are just throwing different names on the same present actuality of the experiential field. It's like I can say, this is my left hand, this is my both hands, this is my arms, this is my body, this is my legs, this is my toe, this is my big toe, this is my big toenail. What changed? I was just words, pointing to apparent differences in a continuum of wholeness that is just present. It's not like everything else disappears and my hand appears when I say my hand. So I say this chair, the chair hasn't been actually created as a separate thing by describing it and naming it and saying and claiming that it has. I can't find a chair. All I can find is all of this. And the chair comes with. The hands come with. There's just a continuum, and all of these things that we think of as sub-classifications are just designations. It's like taking a picture that you've never seen before, and the picture just appears. The picture's a picture. And then you can look at the picture and say, oh, look, that's this, and that's that, and that's this, and that's that, and that's this in the picture. And it's a picture of my Uncle Joe, and look, he's standing next to the old car we had back then, and look, there's our dog. And it's like, no, it's just a picture. The only thing that's there is a picture. And all of these designations are just imaginary subcategorizations of a continuum. And when you designate a subcategory, you haven't actually created a separation. You don't actually, it doesn't actually, I can't take this chair and lift it out of my experience and have the chair here. All that's here is my experience. And the chair is just a designation, a claim, it's a spin-doctored designation of something that is claimed to be there. But the chair isn't very stable. Every time I blink, it disappears. I leave the room, it disappears. All of these subcategorizations are not reliable. They come and go. There's one thing that does not come and go, and that's the experiential field itself, actuality itself. And again, this isn't theoretical, just, look at your own experience, and this is, it becomes very, very clearly obvious that it is this way. So, that's just, sort of a very small poking at some of the aspects of this great matter that we're here to investigate. And it can be gone into in great depth and in enormous detail, which I invite you to engage in me in doing. But it's really just one issue. It's so simple. We overcomplicate it by trying to deconstruct it, and there's nothing to deconstruct. The simple fact is, it's a reality check. Look and see what's real. Look and see what's here. And if you look and see what's here, you ultimately will not be able to find anything other than the presence of your experiential field. Period. And trying to add to that, it's experience of this or of that, will reveal itself to be basically just imaginary activity within your experiential field. So it doesn't actually add to anything. It's just seemingly internal elaborations and vortices within this soul presence that exists. This is completely obvious. Every small child, every baby knows this. There's nothing present but this. Wow! Here it is. But in the course of being raised, of course, we're all brainwashed in, oh, I'm mommy, this is daddy, this is your little you, and this is this, and this is that. Really? And at first, of course, the baby is just like, it doesn't take. But eventually, just through sufficient repetition, we get sucked in, we get caught up in this, we're taught referential language, and we get caught up in the semantic spiderweb of the 10,000 things that, you read a dictionary, and every word in the dictionary is different. And so they each are about something that's not anything else, right? Each one is it and not any of the others. So this word means, dog means dog, and all the other words mean something else that is non-dog. And so we had this vast, confusing world with all these billions of subcategorizations, and what the hell are they, and how do they fit together? And I don't know, and it all doesn't make any sense. But it's all been created through semantic structure. It's all spin doctored into existence, because the only thing actually present is experiential field. Anyway, that's the backbone of this issue, and I will be glad to discuss it with you. In terms of one's own exploration of this, it's very important to engage in it honestly and personally. So be with it in terms of what it actually is for you in the moment, and explore issues that come up for you in the moment, rather than approaching it sort of philosophically in third person and discussing it as if it was impersonal principles or something. Because it doesn't matter. All that really matters is what it is to you. It's not anything out there as far as you're concerned.
So, sorry, yeah. Sure. So I noticed, speaking of making it personal, you begin to talk, and I'm thrilled to be here. Had a little chocolate on the way here, which kind of had me up, mine's going. Yeah, I don't think caffeine's gonna be chocolate.
If you did chocolate, you do caffeine. But,
So you begin to talk, loving what you're saying and relating to it, and then the mind goes, oh, and it goes off to, well, what about like going to see Peter in California, and then like, oh, artwork, what about the artwork at the house? And then, I'm noticing that sort of bifurcated attention. Like the mind just is kind of all over the place. The thoughts really want to waylay what's going on here. And I notice that happens a lot when you work. Can you speak to that process of
yes.
sidetracking?
Yeah, there's no sidetracking, there's nothing going on here. The waylaying is what's going on. There's no coherence. Another aspect of what you'll discover if you look at the experiential field is this phenomenon that you're indicating, is there's no consistency, there's no persistence. You start with this and you end up over there, and then you end up over there, and you end up over there, and is it ever otherwise? Is anything other than that? There is no stability, there is no, the nature of attention seems to generate this spontaneous focus. But the focus is absolutely inconsistent and absolutely dynamic. So you start off, you're looking at this, or we're talking about this, or we're thinking about this, and right away it's like, it's like there's a drunken cameraman who's like continually,
Or a cameraman, a high cameraman.
yeah. And it's like that, isn't it? There's no coherence, And again, because of the consensus reality brainwashing, we're all thinking, no, there is coherence here. The incoherence is my fault. I'm supplying the incoherence to a coherence that is here, so it's my error. Wrong. The incoherence that is here is the objective fact. There is no coherence that you're missing, or that is actual and then objective, as opposed to your failing, drifting around in your brains. Yeah, coherence is a myth, is a consensus reality myth. There's nothing particular happening here. There's no core or structure to what's happening. It's all just slippery nothingness that instantly morphs into something else, and that there's never been. It's just off and running continually. And it's not off and running from something. There's nothing to be off and running from. Off and running is what there is.
I was just wondering if it's sort of like, is it busy work, just saying?
What do you mean by that particularly? I mean, sort of, my initial answer is definitely yes, but I want to be sure I understand what you're actually asking.
Well, sort of like, it appears like noticing leads somewhere, but regardless, it just appears that way, and yeah. I have posited this thing of noticing, which basically just means, well, pay attention to what's happening here as it actually is, outside of or without strict regard to your preconceptions of what you're used to thinking it is. So just be with the presence of your experience, being a little bit loose about what you think you're experiencing or what you think is happening, which I call noticing. And it's definitely a trick. It's basically a lie, because noticing is a trick to discover that in fact you're always doing nothing but. Because the very nature of experience is this paying attention to itself. And its nature is this, this spontaneous drift, this weird free floating. But at the same time, it's meaningful and valid to call it noticing, because there is this peculiar phenomena that can seem to happen, a fantasy of orientation, a fantasy of, there is something here that I'm supposed to be paying attention to, and even though I'm failing, it's there and I'm supposed to be doing it. And that's basically how delusion happens. That's basically how we get caught up in suffering, how we get caught up in thinking things are a certain way, and then because they are a certain way, we have to do something about it. I have to do something about it, and since I have to do something about it and I'm fucking up, I'm a failure, and bang, 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 what am I going to do? And basically you're off and running with, human hell. So noticing is...
So you can have like wicked ADHD and it still wouldn't matter. Like some people out there will say like that will prevent you from...
No, nothing prevents anything from anything. In
But
fact, ADHD may be an advantage. ADHD may just be a euphemism for honesty. No, I have great focus. I'm on top of everything and I'm super functional. And I'm a great bullshitter, obviously.
Well, it seems like even if you did, right, even that's where your attention would be. So that's where your attention would be.
Right.
So what you're not focusing on doesn't necessarily exist
Right.
when you're focusing on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Except to notice that when you're focusing on something, there's not really a something.
Yeah,
Because the focus is a spontaneous drift.
yeah,
And yet somehow we can still think there is a something, even though there's this drift, and that's what noticing is supposed to be an antidote to, is to notice that this carrot on a string of things are a certain way, and I'm supposed to get with the program and do something about that, even though I'm a fuck up and I kind of not be great at doing that. That thing, that is, there's a tendency within experience, within consciousness, for that structure to seem to erect itself. And it bootstraps itself up out of nothing, and it has no evidence to support it, because again, the fact is, if things are a certain way, the actuality is, my experience is actually never that way, but it's supposed to be. And then all of a sudden you have all the problematic implications.
Is there a relationship between like a karmic signature and realization?
Let me know a little more about what you mean.
I'm not sure.
No, that's okay. It's actually a very good question. I just want to put it in other terms.
Well, I'm not even sure what a karmic signature is, but I guess it's a confluence of...
It's a very, very interesting issue, though. It's a very interesting issue. Karma is very peculiar and very strange. The way I look at karma, it is the fact that there seems to be, even though there's no absolute coherence to the patterns that appear in experience, there kind of seems to be. Things kind of seem to be a certain way, and they kind of seem to be a certain way, more or less, with some kind of vague degree of consistency. And for me, and for you, things just seem to be however they seem to be, and it seems to be with a certain kind of consistency. Even though you never experience the same thing twice, yet you seem to have the experience that you call going home, which seems to happen repeatedly, and you end up in a place that's, even though your experience of going there is different every time, it still seems to be kind of similar than it was, when I get home, it's going to be kind of like when I was there the last time, even though it's actually completely different, but still it's kind of the same. So this kind of the sameness that sort of permeates, this is the room, obviously my experience of this has never happened before. Everything I'm experiencing now is unique, but I can say, well, yeah, I've been in this room before. I've been in this environment which was kind of like this. So what's up with that? How does it work that there's absolute non-repetition, and yet there's this kind of pseudo-seeming repetition of these patterns that sort of seem to sort of almost recur or echo each other, and these these plot lines and functionalities and life stories that seem to almost recur. And again, this is a question that cannot be answered, but it's a very, very interesting issue. And this has a lot to do with realization, in the sense that what's powerful for realization is to see that these patterns are like, well, I'm trying to think of an analogy that is going to be accessible. The analogy that comes to me is they're like standing waves in a dynamic system, but I'm a technical person, so that might not resonate for you. It's like the seeming coherence of the patterns that seem to occur, that seem to recur, and seem to have some degree of consistence. The powerful fact about them is that they're not actually that way. They seem to be that way, and it's not a matter of denying that they seem to be that way, but they aren't actually that way. It's a lot like looking at the specifics of experience. You're getting very precise with your experience. For example, it's just difficult to find a clear example of it. As people, normal human functioning, we're encouraged to notice and emphasize the similarities. And we're encouraged to gloss over and not notice, and to sort of downplay and ignore the differences. Now, the differences are absolute, because you never actually experience the same thing twice. But the bias for normal human functioning is exactly the opposite. We gloss over the differences, which are absolute, and go to the similarities, which are very general. In other words, this is a recorder which I've owned for a year or so, and every time I do a talk for it, I have it out. So the similarity is that this is the same recorder, and I've had it for a year, and I've seen it, hundreds of times from hundreds of angles, and blah blah blah. So that's a story that emphasizes. That's a normal human story. You say, "Hey, what's that?" And I say, "Oh, that's my recorder. I've had it for a year." Blah blah blah. So that's the normal human orientation, which emphasizes the similarities. But the actuality, the difference is that even though all of that is true, in a weak sense, in a stronger sense, my experience of this right now is unique. I have never, ever seen this before exactly like this, in this light, from this angle, with exactly this color and luminescence and so on. So it's a unique, so the undeniable, immediate, objective fact of the actual experience of this is uniqueness, as contrasted with the weaker sense of yeah, but it's my recorder, and I've seen it. The normal karmic story, the normal story which emphasizes the sameness and the persistence through time and the persistence over the course of one's experience. So it's a matter of prioritizing, of being really honest and clear about what is spin doctoring and what isn't. The differences of experience are not spin doctoring. They're undeniably, objectively, experientially true. It's discoverable, and it's like that. Whereas the similarity is more a general claim. It's more vague. It's my recorder. It looks pretty much the same every time I look at it. All of that is argument. The uniqueness and the difference is not argument. It's non-verbal, undeniable revelation.
So it's more unique than not, but it's more.
Yes. Yeah. There is no repetition. There is zero repetition in experience. You never experience the same thing twice. It cannot be done. And you never even experience the same thing once. if you look very closely, because of how instantaneously fast experience is. The present moment has no duration. It's not like the present moment is like, well, it's real fast, you know, like it's like, what, 16th of a second or 30 seconds, maybe even a thousandth of a second. That's not true. No. It's how long is any particular condition a certain way? And the answer to that is 0 time. You know, it's bizarre, but if you look at your experience, you discover that. And then you discover this ongoing cascade. It's like watching oceans, watching waves at the beach or something. They're only a particular way once, and that once doesn't last. It's at any time. It's not like you can even find that there are a certain way at a certain time, because it's already gone by the time you even find it. I mean, you know, talking about it I just start tripping over the slipperiness of the whole thing. It's impossible. But if you look at this, you know, here's my hand moving. You know, for how long is it in any particular place? The answer is 0 time. You know, it's like, let's think of a second hand on the clock, and this is 12 here, so the second hand's coming. It's almost at 12, it's almost at 12, it's almost at 12, it's leaving 12, it's leaving. How long is it at 12? You know, when you look close, it's not at 12 at all, because it's always, you look closer, it's almost there, you know, but then it's past it. So how long is it there? You know, and this is the way conditions actually work. Time is weird shit. It's just very, very strange. And if you look closely at your experience, you'll discover this. Of course, we're expert at glossing over this. We're expert at not noticing how weird it is, and just sort of, well, you know, it's just here, it's all here, and hanging out, you know. And that's true. But if you look at objectively at what's actually present in your experience and how it's actually present, you'll discover the strangeness. It's really, and you know, I mean, this is what physicists do. The world that physicists live in and the world that physicists examine is inconceivably bizarre. It doesn't even exist. And you can only talk about it in terms of just insanely abstruse mathematical equations, because that's the level of weirdness that they're dealing with. They can't get common sense with it because there ain't no common sense to be found at the cutting edge of where they're looking. And they're not even scratching the surface. This is just, you know, our current Stone Age version of technology is their version of it, you know. And so, and that's what this is. And you don't need, you know, you don't need cyclotrons and you know, all these incredibly elaborate trillion-dollar instruments to look at this. Just look at your experience, and you see that it's that way. You know, the weirdness is actually obvious. The weirdness is actually completely explicit and really plain to see if you let yourself look at it, if you let yourself play it.
I'm sorry, I'm still not sure how the relationship.
Well, it can be said in terms of, in practical terms, in terms of yoga, in terms of realization versus non-realization. Look and see what's true. And ultimately, the nature of what is here is truer than the patterning. Patterning is less true. It's not like patterning is completely untrue, but it's just, the patterning is a result of sloppy averaging. You know, for example, I'm in this room, you know, I was in this room 20 minutes ago. I've been in this room in the past, last year, so on and so forth. You know, so those statements are true using the structure of sloppy averaging. If I want to get precise, then I say, I've never had this experience before. You know? And that's truer, that's more clear, more precise, more sharp than the less true, the true but less true, the true but more sloppy, more averaged out. Yeah, I've been here a bunch of times, nice room, you know, weird art.
Very.
Big blues.
As a biological male, I feel a little intimidated. I don't know what it is.
Big blue boobs.
I don't know what it is.
Great. You could say boobs, but you can't say.
So it's a matter of,
Bush.
so, you
So we
know,
dwell in the not the sloppy averaging. If you go to
yeah,
not sloppy averaging,
yeah.
none of it.
Yeah, because you don't actually dwell in sloppy averaging. You
Yeah.
can only think you do. You actually dwell in, you know, experience is made of specifics. Experience is not made of generalities. You know, and this entire process is noticing what the specifics are, what you've actually experienced. What's the specifics of your experience right now? And the generalities are not here. You have to kind of back up and add them. And virtually all normal human orientation, consensus reality type orientation is to generalities.
So ultimately, realization is just independent of anything. It's not even, you can't even say that word really. I don't know.
And realization is the presence of this as it actually is. And it not interpreting itself as being anything other than that. Because of course it's doing the interpreting just as well. When you think you're thinking about something or oriented to something, it's actually it doing all of that. Because that's actually, if that's occurring, then that means it's an actual present experience of presence, which means it's this present. So when you're thinking, that's this. When you're interpreting, that's this. When you're misinterpreting, that's this. When you're, oriented to generalizations, that's it. That's this. But generalizations don't actually exist, except as generalizations, i.e. spin doctrine. Experience is made of specifics. It's that simple. And specifics are not generalizations. And specifics are unique and instantaneous. So you can't even find them. I mean, you can find them, but you sure can't keep them. But you don't need to keep them because there's always a full field of them. They're self-refreshing, you might say.
Peter, you made the remark about don't go into your head what your experience, ask questions from your experience right now.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to put myself into what I was feeling, and I got hit by anxiety. And I'm thinking it's almost a taboo, like I feel an inner taboo against going to what's real.
Maybe so, but if you do, then that feeling is what's real. And so you can look at that, but not in its own terms. Look at the specifics of what it actually is. Even calling it anxiety is dealing with a generality.
Yeah.
So when something you're calling anxiety is present, what is it that's present, and how is it present? And then you go to the specifics of what it actually is, and of course that takes you to this because that's the only thing that's the only specific there is.
I'd love to hear your thoughts as you think about this. A lot of experience is in relationship, and now I'm talking with others.
Yeah.
As opposed to it's always in relationship with something, but with others, where it seems like language and the consensus reality, or understanding what the consensus reality in this particular relationship is, seems to be an important part. Anyway, your thoughts on that?
Well, it can seem to be a dominant part, whether or not it's important is an interesting issue. Experience is of course ultimately always the same, and there's always the same issues provoked by one's orientation to it, regardless of whether you're looking at it in terms of an interpersonal relationship or your take in the world, or in any context, it's all really about the same issues. So for example, when you're related to somebody, there's a lot of aspects to the nature actuality, the nature of the specifics that we haven't touched on explicitly in talking today. For example, all form, let's call it, has flavor. All form, the specifics aren't just plain vanilla. The specifics are a smorgasbord of richness. And so all forms have flavor. This is why people feel different. You look at someone, you're not just an inert, empty shape. You're a flavor. You're you. And all of that richness that is encoded, let's say, in your form is present in your form. And of course, this is the kind of the meat and potatoes of relationship. So when you're relating to somebody, especially a protracted intimate relationship, let's say, is sort of the strongest case, perhaps. There's a whole lot of engagement with the actuality of the flavor present, but there's also liable to be engagement with interpretations in terms of interpretation, which is going more to generalities. So again, it's not really a special case, other than all these same issues we have been talking about can be present in that context.
Yeah, well, and I guess the question is, this is kind of the source of our consensus reality, is the relationships with others.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think it's just another aspect that we may put particularly high emphasis on, but it's another. It reflects that all these basic issues. I mean, we think of others as others. We think of ourselves, if I think of myself as a human, I think of you all as humans, and then I think we're in a society and all this. So that puts those generalities put an emphasis on the importance of certain things, and then all of which happens in the context of the actual of the more immediate presence of the flavor dynamism, the flavor resonances that are going on. Basically in the midst of that stew, you get the ongoing dynamism. So people have there's actual chemistry caused by the flavor of, let's say, the flavor of this energy system and the flavor of that energy system, that sets of actual polarities. And you'll have greater degrees of, consonance with some people and greater degrees of dissonance with some people, and all, just intrinsically, just because of your flavor. And then over the top of that, you may have an added layer of, of general interpretations of, but this person's in this role and I'm in this role and this, that, and the other. All of which, occurs within that same context, within that same milieu. And the actual relating is sort of that most people experience is sort of the sum of all that. I mean, if you look at, perhaps a simple and primal way of looking at a relationship is looking at the relationship of a newborn baby or a baby to its mother. When the child's in the womb, the relationship with the mother is completely intimate and completely without conceptual overlay, completely without interpretation. It's just absolute intimate, flavored, full-on intimacy, spontaneous presence. And then that continues at birth and immediately after birth, and then gradually begins to develop complexity as the baby develops ability to do abstractions and develops the ability to, this is mother, and this is not mother, and all of these various things, and all of a sudden, but the immediacy of the intimate flavor engagement hasn't gone anywhere, these new additions of abstraction to become kind of overlays within that context. So it's like adding additional layers to the initial engagement. And so this is kind of a map of, and this is, you can look at the development of these abstracted orientations, in anyone's case in the same, in impersonal, it's the same thing. So with the mother, the newborn, the immediately born child is still this intimate, complete, this energy presence, flavor, without any overlays. And the environment's the same thing. What is the crib the baby is lying in, or the mat, or the blanket it's wrapped in, what is that to it? It's an energy presence. There's no conceptual overlay at all. But then, if you follow along, say, weeks, months, years, you may get the development of these abstract overlays of interpretation of, oh, this is this and that's that, and this is like this and that's that, which builds on top of the immediate energy presence. And then, oh, this is a blanket, and it's not me, and it's not mom, and that's mom, and that's not me, and this is me, and that's not mom. And so all of that, but all of that is again, is a sort of an additional layer floating above the immediate energy presence, which of course hasn't gone anywhere. So, so it doesn't have, so relationship doesn't have a privileged position in terms of, in terms of the way this orientation happens, but it is it can be seen there as well as anywhere else. Initially, at its most raw, its most experiential level, there's nothing but relationship, and relationship is full on with everything. So, all experiential qualities are present with absolute intimacy. And in that presence, they have the flavor that they have with absolute intimacy and absolute connection. And that is relationship by its very, in its primal nature. So, that wall, just by its presence, is the relationship that I have with that wall, just in that flavor presence, in that juxtaposition. And the same with, with you all, with anything. So there's again, because the experiential energy presence is not plain vanilla, it's not neutral, it's not just mechanical, it's pregnant with flavor and richness and quality. And energies, by their very nature, seem to have a kind of they have an a priori relationship just built into their nature. Oil and water don't mix. And if my flavor was like water and the flavor of that wall was like oil, I would look at that wall and go, something wrong here, I want to go elsewhere. Whatever. Or with people, it's the same thing. You walk into a room with 10 people in it you've never met before, and you immediately have a hit on all of them. Immediately you kind of like that person, that person kind of puts you off on this person, whatever, right? However you qualify. How does that happen? Because you perceive an energy flavor that by its very nature relates to your intrinsic energy flavor as a sort of a degree of resonance that is, that is smooth or less smooth, or whatever. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? Just to get up and stretch.
Yeah. We just have to find colors. You know, it's like trying to fall asleep. There's no pillows downstairs, is there, Jeff? Or we have to go across the,
Oh my God.
ask Jeff what the code is. I don't know. You have to ask Jeff what the code is. I forget. Phone for the door. Are they over there?
Yeah, I've tried that, yeah.
I don't know. You want to get some link? Are there? I know, me too. Are there? Should I go? No, I think we have a break.
Yeah, it's hard, it feels good, but it's hard. I mean, nowadays, you know, so hard, it's kind of good, it's be bread.
So this one, you're like, chaos.
Well, we are, you know, we get some of the, and then make the crust all
Well, to the package.
So you're leaving tonight?
Carol and Karen and me, Cheers.
That's how it's being heard. And it doesn't.
Share certain items of clothing. And we just got through it. So
Very
it was funny, we got some, you know, like traveling pants, I believe. Yeah, we have some. Awesome.
I'll just watch it on my phone.
You can get double time. You can watch it on the phone and get you live.
That's just good.
A little bit of both. Yeah. Double it.
Infinite perspective. That's an old citation.
I have a question.
Yes.
Part philosophical, part firsthand. Reading spiritual teachings or being exposed to them over, of course, a seeker's life. There's this myth of reverse engineering. Like if I do meditation, I'll stop suffering. If I do yoga, I'll stop suffering. If I do noticing, I'll stop suffering. If I travel lighter, if I, do whatever, if I say, who am I enough times, I'll stop suffering. And But if you look to let's say the genesis of the first-hand genesis of the realizer's experience, to a T, none of them woke up by virtue of doing what they espouse as a poetic reference or teaching.
Right.
Ramana didn't sit around doing who am I, right? And I would argue for fun that you weren't doing a ton of noticing to come to a certain kind of fruition or understanding.
Okay,
Yeah,
you can argue.
yeah. You can argue it. Which is okay. I mean, it's, it's a fun insight. It doesn't necessarily leave one with anything, but that notion of applying oneself according to a body of poetic teaching, which is offered with the most sincerity, doesn't necessarily, bring one to whatever this is or isn't. Okay. So there's a magical element, or an acausal element.
Magical is good.
Yeah. And like you suggested, looking at so-called present experience or present moment or present anything, the only thing you're going to find is a referential artifact in mind or wherever that suggests what your first-hand experience even is.
But yes and no, right?
Yeah. So then there is this magical element.
Yes.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Where if I, whatever I take myself to be, I'm exploring whatever that suggests, present experience, which is not even existent, I can find all kinds of artifacts which suggest my so-called suffering, the right motive for that suffering to end, and maybe even some symptoms of the absence of suffering.
Right.
And those go where they go, repeat. What's fun is, as capable as I am, I presume other people are, of, marvelous profusion of felt sense and discovery and conclusion and implication. The real fun is when all of that just is gone through no effort of my own.
Right.
And you could say the radiant impossibility of whatever this is or isn't has kind of wiped my clock clean.
Right.
And there's no longer the reflex of claiming or the reflex of, any insistence on artifact or reason or effort or anything at all.
Right.
Yeah, the radiance is as bizarre as it is, and there's nothing.
Right.
There's just no association at all, and yet there's a thrill, kind of a joyous thrill of the immersion in it as it, without other.
Nothing but.
Nothing but. Yeah, okay. And these, let's call them two. One is the field of artifacts and claiming, and the other is just, speechless joy. Yeah, they seem to move of their own accord.
Yes.
And the let's say the presence of a willful interest to ameliorate oneself from claiming, of course, is just the ongoing fury of claiming itself. That there's an entity in here perturbed by the content of myself that really wants to be done with or get out from under the influence of consciousness as unpleasant experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then curiously, again, without finding any causal component, that just gone. The claiming is gone.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, all these, the many points you've touched on are interesting, very interesting. I think it makes, I think it's most practical to approach it in terms of layers. Experience occurs concurrently on a lot of different layers. And you know, the practical issue in spirituality is where you're going to hang out. What's your home layer? And you know, most people, you know, most consensus reality type, normal oriented people hang out in a layer of abstractions and interpretations as their, you know, their home base, their primal orientation.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, there's a whole lot of other strata of experience occurring concurrently, let's say. And because these other strata are occurring, they're actually being experienced. They're just somehow not being attended to. Now, exactly what constitutes attention, what constitutes attending to or not attending to, and the degree to which that's malleable or manipulatable or steerable,
Yeah.
is an open question, which I will leave to the philosophers.
Yeah.
But it's practical to pretend that one may have some degree, maybe perhaps minuscule, perhaps not so,
Yeah.
of navigation, whereby one could possibly attend to something which one is in fact already attending to, even though one has a bias of denying that attention and trying to emphasize another particular way. So in other words, there's no, you know, I can't give any final resolution of these issues, but I find it practical to look at it as if there was some actual degree of navigability.
Yeah.
And to point out that in actual fact, the strata of raw experiencing, the strata of immediate, immersive, joyful, ongoing, infinite wholeness is in fact always being experienced, whether or not it's being enjoyed explicitly or participated in or acknowledged. And so, you know, on that basis of supposing that there is some navigability, I'm encouraging and hopefully and attempting to enable exploiting that, taking advantage of it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the whole noticing myth is predicated on the notion of some steerability. That you can, if noticing was viable, then it would be possible to do it in some sense.
Yeah.
And whether or not that's, you know, deliberate or accidental or not, is an interesting question. But I encourage and invite people to explore that question, because it may be that you find, whether or not you have navigated there, you may find yourself, you know, nakedly experiencing and acknowledging these more primal strata, which are so intrinsically fulfilling.
Yeah. Well,
But it's certainly true that, sorry, it was a brief addendum. It's certainly true that orienting to these techniques in a mechanical or simplistic way is absurd and, you know, a sure dead end.
yeah. As if something is, you know, pre-existing and call it secularly or spiritually true. I haven't been noticing it, and you could say suffering the consequences of that failure to notice it. And then some kind of success in contemplation or noticing or refinement of sensitivity begins to show up in my experience, and these other layers or strata of fascination become undeniable. But even the sense of pre-existing, already so conditioned that I've been experiencing, but unconsciously so, is just, again, an artifact of, present speech or present consideration.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Nothing, is there anything other than this? Was there anything true prior to this moment? Could it really be said that I was missing the point and now I have found the point I wasn't enjoying, now I am enjoying? It's like the consciousness itself, discovery itself, present, the radiant engagement itself is so fucking weird that to suggest that anything is or was true prior to now is another artifact of, presumption.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is kind of fun to see. It's kind of liberating to see that the pushiness of present experience, the insistence of present experience is like now, and 1,000 things at a minimum could be said about it, and nothing could be said about it or be held to be true.
Yeah. That's good noticing.
Yeah, such is the nature of its impersonal appearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is nothing but the present moment of experience in exactly the way that it is that. And that's explicitly revealed, that's completely obvious. And in that, there's an infinite range of ways it can seem to be, including just exactly that, or including augmented and abstracted orientations to that, which are that and exist within that.
Yeah.
And again, it's not a matter of eliminating abstraction, it's a matter of seeing it.
And even what we're saying is this or that, just exactly that, doesn't really mean anything.
Well, it does. I think it does mean something very specific. This is precisely and specifically exactly what it is. Talking about it doesn't mean anything.
Okay,
but the fact of that it is this and that it is this way is a fact. It's not. It's very specific. It's very precise.
But that's a textural appreciation of it, not a philosophical appreciation.
This is not an abstraction, although all abstractions can seem to present as abstraction.
Yeah.
That's the whole point, is that abstraction exists with actuality. The substance of abstraction is actuality, of course, what else would it be made of?
Yeah.
And so abstraction and actuality are a continuum, and they're not antagonistic.
Yes.
But the actuality is primal. Abstraction is an artifact of actuality, not the other way around.
Yes.
And which again is self-evident, both logically and experientially. But when you see that experientially, then you're free from orienting to these abstractions, which are generalities and which, by their very nature, include inaccuracy.
Yeah.
Because generalities are constructed by omitting specifics, because you have an infinity of specifics, or let's say an infinity of specific.
Yeah.
And that's the fact, and generalities pare that down so that they can hold it as being this or that. Generalities are oversimplification.
And those generalities would include what I would refer to as individuated consciousness, my body, myself,
anything that could be referred to is an abstraction.
Yeah, that's right.
Anything that could be designated is an abstraction. And it's not unreal, it's just untrue as being the way the abstraction would imply that it is.
Yeah.
So your body and your consciousness are not untrue, they just aren't your body and they're not your consciousness. All of those are aspects of
ways of looking at this that completely and utterly transcends being that way. So it's a strange state of coexistence, because abstraction is not untrue, it's just inaccurate because it's partialized. So, Pebble Hill Church is here.
Yeah.
That's undeniable. It's true as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough because it doesn't include the totality of the experiential reality of the present moment, of which that abstraction is an infinitesimally tiny, partialized, smeared part.
Well, they're this subtle reflex, let's say, of wanting to be the successful experiencer of presence.
Congratulations.
Right?
You can't not be.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you can't not be.
Here's your diploma.
Yeah, thanks. I'll hang it up as soon as I get home. But the subtle genesis of claiming as self, I don't have any navigable control over that. And that subtle claiming as self, I would suggest, the apparent duality, which then lands my attention or my interpretive experience into the world of unsatisfactory artifacts once again.
But claiming of self may do that, but that's not all it does. Claiming of self may imply all sorts of unsatisfactory artifacts,
Yeah.
but claiming of self is also just a reflection of the actuality, which is self,
Yes.
and which is all claim. I mean, any claim is this.
Yeah, where else could it be? Yeah.
So claiming of self is fine. It's the implications, the supposition that has specific implications. That's where you're stepping off into
Okay.
erroneousness. And if you look at the specific implications,
Right.
you find that they also devolve to just this. So you have a zero-sum game. You're claiming yourself and you have all these problematic implications and you haven't actually done anything. Here you are.
Yeah. Well, then you could say it's a kind of belligerence,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah.
To keep it locked in as my experience, separation, duality,
Sure.
Yeah, it's a kind of activized.
It's a game strategy.
Yeah, if not, and it doesn't mean it's an unsatisfactory belligerence.
Well, hopefully not.
Yeah. No, there's plenty of golden moments in the midst of, living as a creature under the influence of artifacts. Galore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, a point in the context of this conversation, a point I would want to emphasize is that there's no polarity whatsoever between abstractions and artifacts and actuality. There's no either or there. There's no dichotomy whatsoever. It's not a question of this or that. They're one and the same. You're looking at the same thing from, say, different angles or with different emphases.
Yeah.
So it's again, and seeing that is not contrary to either. In other words, seeing the coexistence of abstraction and actuality is not contrary to abstraction, and it's not contrary to actuality. It's just simple. It's simply the fact.
Yeah.
And it's really not. It's not even a very abstruse fact. It's really pretty plain to see.
Yeah.
And that's the point. Is in spiritual delusion, there's the insistence and orientation to abstraction, while the denial, essentially,
Yeah.
of direct experience, which is a fabrication.
Yeah.
Because direct experience is an undeniable fact, And so simply noticing that fact You can still hang out in the abstractions and insist on them all you want,
Sure.
but notice that the abstractions are abstractions of and within actual experience. It's not, it's a pervasive oversimplification within all kinds of spirituality that you have to get out of the abstractions and get to the reality. And that's just kind of absurd. Yeah, good luck, and there's no need because it's so absurd.
Yeah.
You don't have to get out of the abstractions, just see that abstractions are, waves on the surface of this vast ocean.
Yeah.
So the abstractions are the waves are the ocean is the waves, there's no problem whatsoever, we're all buddies here.
So then it seems like there need be a kind of a relaxation of the reflex to grab a handle, to insist on implication, to bring myself forward into the future, or strategize for personal safety.
But there's nothing wrong with even doing that. Just again, the problem is the denial of actuality. Let yourself acknowledge the context within which all that's occurring, and then the intrinsic relaxation is already implicit.
Yeah.
Because then you see you're doing a strategic partialization within something that is not partial, and which is fine. So you're playing a game, you're playing Monopoly within a house which is more than Monopoly.
Yeah.
Cool, so you don't hurt the room you're in by playing Monopoly in it.
Right.
And likewise, you don't hurt or separate yourself from the fullness of being, of actuality, actual presence, by doing strategizing and abstracting within it. You're just taking advantage of certain possibilities of it and to erect a game structure.
Sure.
What I've been wrestling with as I think about this is the fact that part of experience is the abstraction. And this is what led to the relationship.
That's what I'm saying.
Language is an abstraction. And a lot of the experience is in relationship with others, where language is an important part of that relationship, therefore an important part of the experience.
Sure.
So abstraction isn't separate from experience.
Of course. How can it be separate? What would it be made of? No, everything. This is the point. There's only one thing happening here, and it's inclusive. You can't leave it. You can't get away from it. You can't separate from it. And all this, language and abstraction pretends to create separation and division, but the operative word just pretends, because it is no actual separation or division. It can't be done. And so, again, it becomes not a matter of, oh, I'm in abstraction, or I have to get out of abstraction to get to reality. It's a fallacy. You don't have to get out of anything. Just see what's actually here, and you discover the inclusiveness of these different modes of possibilities that are present within it, and you understand reality. And the implication of what that is conveys itself. And that implication is one of fullness, of
Now, what's interesting on the experience is there's multiple layers of abstraction in parallel with each other.
Sure.
And these layers aren't necessarily on top of each other there. Alternative ways of abstracting it. In relationship, there may be different consensus reality as we deal with different sets or different abstractions. There's no reason why we can't live in all of those.
But because when you live in them, you're not actually living in them, because they don't actually exist. They're just game structure. But absolutely. And there's no, I use this, we're talking about in terms of stratification and all that, but there's no reason to hold that as being actual structurality that you could map out or anything.
Right.
All you can say is that there just seem to be possible modes that this can present. And you can't sort it out or deconstruct it or find a structurality with it. But that's not the point. You don't need to. You know, the fundamental point is that experience is made of specifics, it's not made of generalities. And yet generalities can be erected on the basis of specifics. But in erecting generalities, you haven't negated or canceled out the specifics. And in this case, the specifics is the actual real-time fact of the presence of the experiential field.
Peter, is it correct to say, or what are your thoughts on this, that what reality is, nature, for example, is this one substance? And it's pretty, this
Absolutely.
luminosity.
Sure, you can say that.
And it has all these qualities that we speak of, and it's self-created, you know, exists beyond space and time, multi-dimensional, and it can present as anything in the moment, and we are that, and vice versa, you know, we're that, it's us, it's the creator or whatever, and that's what we are, we're just experiencing that moment to moment.
Yes, exactly so. Or, you know, more precisely, it's experiencing itself moment to moment, which you could call your experiencing. I mean, you know, that's what we're in the habit of doing. But yeah, absolutely. No, that's very well put.
And can you experience that, you know, like the luminosity? I mean, I had this experience where everything was, you know, dissolved was not the right word, but became this luminous light or radiant light.
Sure.
With pure intelligence and stuff that you talk about.
Sure.
But it was so I had this all, you know, I had no context to understand what happened. So it's been taking years to kind of come to terms of how to kind of exist, or, you know, to realize that is not like another place, that this place is that place. Now I am that place.
Yes, exactly.
And with years of not understanding what the experience was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fairly typical. I mean, that was my own experience as well. You know, I had a direct experience of what it actually is, you know, and it blew my mind. And it took me decades to really see very precisely and clearly that's this. That's not some that over there. That's in some, you know, unknown as yet undiscovered relationships. That is this. This is that. Yeah, this literally is nothing but transcendental radiant presence.
So
you know, to coin a technical phrase. But again, the fact is implicit in the immediate presence of experience. You know, the presence of your experience. If you look at what it is, it obviously is self-arisen.
Right.
It obviously is, you know, transcendental. It transcends analysis. It transcends resolving as being this way or that way. You know, I mean, you know, again, you know, it's both absurd and impossible to enumerate the qualities that it can be seen in it. But again, you don't need to. The thing itself reveals all that.
Is there any benefit to try to go, you know, so sometimes I still feel like the urge, like, you know, I want to go back to that space, you know, but that space is this space.
Back to which space?
The space is just like pure luminosity.
This is that.
I know, but it feels, you know, not as transcendent. Maybe this is where I'm still not, you know, experiencing reality the way it really presents.
Right, okay.
And I don't see it as that, but it seems like a lesser, more gross experience than the more, supposedly more peak experience.
Right, I understand.
And so that's kind of like you always ask, like, where are you at? Exactly, that's where I'm at. I can see that this is that, but this still feels somewhat like a lesser experience than that.
It's just a degree of concentration of perspective. How can I put this?
But the crap is, of the distracted mind is still, the labeling still sits on top of.
Yeah, but there's no on top of it, because the labeling itself is, what is it made of? I mean,
Nothing but radius.
yeah, and I don't mean as an abstract question, it's a theoretical question. I mean, experientially, what is it made of? When the mind is doing labeling, what is it that's present? And again, you find just this spontaneously present weirdness conveying qualities and form without ever collapsing to any stability or anything you can put your hands on, which is all you ever find with anything. I mean, a lot of this revolves around the issue that we touched on earlier, and that, is probably going to be something that will be coming up again and again in the course of this today, is this issue of apparent karmic patterning. This is fundamentally, absolutely unpatterned energy apparition, spontaneous energy apparition, okay? And yet, it seems to be so highly patterned. And so this is the fundamental paradox. It's basically the root, the root of confusion.
Why am I presenting as this? This is like a presentation. Why is this presentation here?
Exactly. But if you look at the details of the presentation, they don't resolve into actual details. They seem to be details, but when you go into them, you just find, flashes of light.
Infinity.
Yeah.
Every point goes into infinity.
Exactly. So that is the liberating fact, and yet the other aspect is it still seems to present with all this patterning. Again, the patterning is when you really get down to the way in which patterns appear and are held to be. Even patterns themselves are basically generalities. If you look at the specifics, you find flashes of instantaneous energy presence. So, light is very high frequency, so it's difficult to talk about light experiential, and in fact, it's not hard to do, but it's probably the worst case. But if you're talking about sound, it may be much clearer. For example, so I'm talking and I'm saying sentences and words, so that's the pattern of sentences and words. But if you listen to the stream of sound that's happening as I speak, very, very precisely in the instant, all you'll hear is there's no sentences and words, it's just basically like energy flashes, energy blips. That's all that's actually there. So the sentences and the patterns and the words aren't actually there, they're just these energy blips. And if you generalize and sort of zoom out and take them, hold them over time with what the previous energy blips were like and the future energy blips, you coalesce them into an ongoing sentence. And that is there, but is made of and actually consists of nothing but the instantaneous energy patterns. So it's a matter of which is more fundamental, which is the specific and which is the abstraction, which is the generalization. And the generalization always errs by omission. It's always an oversimplification. If you really listen carefully to all the sound that I'm making, it's 90% of it is not words or English. It's just weird mouth sounds. But we sort of it's like reading a person's handwriting. Someone gives you a note and says, "Oh, please stop at the store and bring home a quart of milk." So you take the "please stop at the store and bring home a quart of milk" as the message. But if you look at what's actually on the paper, it's just all of this other stuff that's there, which really has absolutely nothing to do with those words. So those words are a simplification of the specifics of what's actually present as the note. And
Is that how you think of karma? Is like that's the imprint that, so there's the radiance, the purity, or whatever, pure energy, pure intelligence. And then there seems to be an overlay or like a presentation of how that form comes together. Or
Right, but that's what I'm saying, that's what I'm trying to point out, is that the patterning that shows up as karma, as anything, as an interpretable, meaningful chain of events or structures, is basically an oversimplification, a generalization of information present, which is much more, of which there's much more of it and is much less coherent than what's pulled out of it as being the pattern. And that's basically true of all patterning, but even on an immediate, very primal level of sensory experience. So I can sit here and look at you, and it's very easy to see that I'm seeing you. But the you that I'm seeing isn't really there. All that's really there is these instantaneous flashes of color and luminosity. That's all that the eye really perceives, and that's all that really gets into the brain. But then there's a process of sort of the first layer of generalization and abstraction is I simplify all of this stuff into a more coherent, dulled down version, which can be stable enough to be held as being a you, and which can then be differentiated from other information, which can be held as being not you. And so then I can have you in the room, as opposed to the actuality, which is just the presence of all sorts of flashes of light and color. But the light and color, the flashes of light and color are still there, but then there's this, you think of it as another layer of sort of generalizing it and simplifying it as having this extra coherence, which isn't actually there. And that's what enables karma to seem to be interpreted. But it's more subtle than that, and ultimately it's inscrutable. The nature of what this is and what it's doing is not something that can be discovered or answered. It can be felt and known and participated in, but you can't pin it down. So, why am I me? And you can't blame that simply on generalization. There seems to be what might be thought to be, an intrinsic process in this that, for reasons of it being what it is, it presents as this, as opposed to some that, let's say, as opposed to that. And that's not a question that's answerable or addressable. But it's not really important, because for purposes of liberation, the important part is to see what's the specific, what's the actual occurrence that is happening here versus the abstraction. And it turns out that the actual occurrence is absolutely transcendental. And all the problems arise from the abstractions on that specific.
Peter, there's another thing in that light of radiance of luminosity. It felt, and this is a question, but it felt like it had like infinite potentialities, almost like physics, like they call it a singularity or something. It has the potential to be almost, it's like the energy before the thought, the energy before the thing.
Sure.
Could you talk about that? I often wondered how would you interpret that, or is that in?
Yeah. The energy that is here is not, it's like a flash of light is like raw material. And then you can then subsequently take that flash of light and process it in various different ways and have presented as various different things. I mean, if you go to see a movie, basically all there is light, and the projector is light, is shining. And then the light is modified by the film, and then it shows up on the screen as patterns of colored light, and then consciousness takes that and adds generalizations and abstractions and turns it into characters and plot lines and events and emotional implications and all of that stuff. But the raw material that started it all is just light, shining, and that is pure potential. It could be anything. You could show any movie with the same light bulb in the projector, right? And experience is like that as well. So if you look at the energy that's actually present in experience, it's basically that, it's analogously to just the presence of light. And then the light presents itself. The fact that it's presented with all this apparent differentiation doesn't cut it off from being just radiance. So in the initial instance, it's just radiance, and then it can subsequently seem to be you, or this glass, or a thought, or a hangnail, or whatever. But it's the same radiance, it's the same energy presence that can appear as being all of those things. So the differentiations are subsequent to, you could say logically subsequent to, the initial energy presence. So the prime fact is radiant presence. And then because of that, all bets are off. and because of that, anything else, that you want to, or that you find yourself holding it as being. But without that prime fact, the rest wouldn't be there. Without the light bulb in the projector, there'd be no movie, whatever the movie is. And again, not as abstractions, but the movie is the abstraction, the light bulb is the fact. And again, radiant presence is the fact, and then the abstractions and the generalities are, can exist and can be held to be viable because of that fact and in the context of that fact. And in fact, by that fact, because the light bulb analogy in the projector isn't perfect, because the light bulb of the radiance is actually what's seeing the radiance as well as what's shining forth the radiance, so to speak.
All the components as one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What happens, like, it seems like enlightenment or realization is like the myth, like, with all these myths, and so what happens to the mythical world after self-realization?
It doesn't go anywhere.
The relationship to it change then? Or?
Yes, relationship changes, but not in a way that you think. It's very much like asking what happens to the dream when you go luminous within a dream, when you go lucid within a dream. Nothing, or not.
Usually relief or something.
Yeah, relief. Realization is definitely relief.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that for sure. But that may be all of it.
Yeah.
Because
that may be all of it.
Yeah. Because you see what this has always been. So it's not a change of affairs. You see what this has always been, and what it turns out to be is a great relief from what you thought it was.
But is it an intellectual kind of thing, or
no,
is it different? The relief is different, it's beyond that.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Again, I started talking today, I think you may have missed my opening sentence, I don't remember when I said it, but it's all about implication. What it feels to you is going on is an implication of what this seems to be. So you're holding this to be a certain way, just by the very nature of experiencing it as being anything. And then that has implications, and the implications are what it feels like to you. So realization, you see what's actually happening here, which has a very different implication than the implication of consensus reality worldview of, oh, I'm this little person stuck in this horrible world and life sucks and then you die. So when you see what's actually happening, all of a sudden you get the implication of that, and that's where the relief comes in. Because the implication of what's actually here is vastly different. Because what is actually here is vastly different than people generally think it is.
It seems so easy to like sort of intellectualize some things. And like, I'm guessing it's much different. See beyond things in a more realized way or something, I don't know. Is it best just to stay away from those sort of intellectual interpretations?
No, it doesn't matter, but intellectualization is not powerful.
Yeah.
Seeing is powerful. Seeing is not intellectualization. Seeing is discovering something undeniably experiential.
Then there's that sort of like interpretive kind of aftermath.
Yeah, but that's fine. It's not that's irrelevant one way or the other, because it's not powerful.
Mm-hmm.
What's powerful, seeing is what's powerful. And it's funny because even the energization of our fears and our horrors and our aversions originate from seeing. So, for example, the experience of pain, that's actual experience. But then if you have a misinterpretive context of the source of that pain, then that sets up a whole orientation of fearfulness around what you interpret as being the context and the course of the pain. But the pain itself is a transcendental actuality. The pain itself was just an actual energy presence. So even the interpretation is based in seeing. Seeing is powerful. That's why pain is powerful. Pain is powerful because it's actual. But the interpretation of what the pain was and why it was and what caused it and what to do to avoid it is abstract, so it's not powerful. And experience itself is the ultimate power. So when you see the presence of experience is primarily forceful, and you're always seeing it, but because the force that it has is so open-ended, it doesn't usually have much implication within a human context, within a human worldview. So everyone is being blown away by existential presence. But they don't notice they're being blown away because that doesn't fit into a storyline that you can make a story about. But it's the basis for all the storylines that they do make, that they do orient to. But when you see the power of the existential presence in itself outside the context of the storylines that are partializations of that, then you get the implication of that, which is the intrinsic storyline, which is open-endedness, infinite inclusiveness, infinite wholeness, infinite spontaneity, and transcendence.
So are we any more ourselves than we are anybody else? Or is it?
Well, there is no one else. There's only you. And for someone else, it's only them. So don't bother trying to figure that out.
That's too much. I just shut down.
But just look at the actuality. All you can find is you don't know any other experiences. You can suppose that I experience and the people around you experience, but you can't know that. So that's just an abstraction. To you, the actuality is there's only one experiencer, one you, one self. Right? And everything else is just an object. That's just simple, pragmatic observation. It's not, so theoretically the philosophical issue of whether or not other people exist is just that, a philosophical issue. But the practical issue is you can only find one being, which is you. So in terms of just being pragmatic, being practical, start with that. So you exist, your experience exists, and you can't find anything else that exists. I mean, if you look, you can't find anything else that exists.
All you, right? All people's archetypal, dynamics and the history of everybody who, you've ever heard of them.
But all of that exists within you in whatever way it does, in abstractions or as thought or as memory or as anything. But it's still, that's just patterns appearing within your experience. And your experience is the only thing you can find. So there's his actuality, the presence of your experiential field. And that's inclusive, that's the whole schmear. There's nothing outside that you can find. And the idea that there's anything outside that is an idea that occurs within that. So even an outside world is just a fantasy of within you. And you can't find any edges to your experience, you can't find any boundaries, because you can't find a place you get to where it stops. So it's limitless, infinite, inclusive being that shows up as all this instantaneous presence of information that is only present in the instant. So it's just, it's just simple pragmatism, simple reality check of what's actually here that I can find. Well, I can find my experiential field. And what do I mean by mind? Mind means the experiential field. Which means, so in that case, me is this. So I am this. Okay, cool. If you go look for an I, try and find an I where you're going to look. You're going to look in this, and anywhere you look, is it any more or less you? It's not like there's a you that you can find sitting somewhere that's more you than something else you can find which is less you.
But your karmic signature that doesn't exist. Your sloppy averaging doesn't factor in more.
What do you mean doesn't factor in more?
Well, the I pretending. I can't articulate anything, but.
I pretending can seem to appear, but even if that appears, it's just another appearance within your experiential field. And appearances are just appearances. But what's important about the appearances is how do they appear? What are they made of? So if you're watching a movie, then you can say, well, this is Indiana Jones, and this is this, and this is that, and this is this. But what is it really? It's light appearing, light shining on the screen. That's what it's made of. And the Nazis that are appearing is the light just as much as Indiana Jones is appearing as the light, is just as much as the sky that's above their heads is the light. It's all the same light. So if I look at, well, my neurotic ego orientations, what's that appearing in, what's it made of? Well, it's just made of this presence. What's, that plant hanging in the window appearing in my visual field made of? It's just made of this presence. So it's all the same thing, present, made of the same substance. And all of these sub-classifications I have of it, about this is my personality, this is an objective observation, this is that, is just spin doctoring of something that's all basically one thing. What's getting on? It's 12:30, why don't we knock off for lunch? We can try to come back here like by 2:15, say. Why don't we say 2:15 and 10 minutes left this place, so.
There's lots around us.
How's Dan?
He's good. He's something else that came up. So.
He's not